Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in once again. It's David Summers hosting another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. It's the story of wrestling in America, as told by the Stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. We step back into the ring, back into time with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller, hanging out in the Great Smoky Mountains. What's going on, my man, Ron?
Oh, man, it's a little bit nicer today. Been through a real nice stretch of weather. A little warmth came through and some nice days. Dropped off a little bit last night, but it's going to go back up again. It's just up and down this time of year. The leaves are all gone. It's a little bit not as beautiful as it has been since I got here last April, but still it's a beautiful spot.
So
nothing to complain about, man.
So I think a couple of weeks, last week maybe it was, you established that you do not own a rake, and you were not planning on buying a rake down at Ace Hardware to clean the leaves out of the yard.
That's correct.
Okay.
No, I'm going to let them just go on and just disintegrate naturally, I guess.
Okay, so will you just watch the leaves disintegrate?
Well, they're all gone basically now. You know, even the ones that have fallen.
Right.
We started to lose our leaves here probably 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
3 weeks ago, maybe in some places. So, especially in the higher elevation, been gone up there for a while.
Yeah.
See up top of the mountains, and that was gone probably 3 weeks ago.
Well, we understand that you're not fond of outdoor chores, and by now you probably, maybe by spring you'll have a lawn crew or something, right?
Well, I hope so, man.
Okay. Yeah, I hope so. All right, Stud. All right, let's get this thing going. Hey, by the way, you have been building toward the first ever Knoxville Coliseum Thanksgiving night event. I think in the conversations that you and I have had that you're just as excited about this particular night and the card as the fans were on that night, Thanksgiving in 1977. It was a pretty big deal. Before we get to that, though, we're both really excited about what's happening on your YouTube Southeastern Rewind channel as well. Tell us what's going on.
Well, we sure are, man. Wow, it's just been crazy. The channel is that's only been around for about 6 months, and in that 6 months, I spent a lot of time trying different things, man. I want to find out what fans really like and what they really want. So this past week, man, was a record breaker for first week releases. I think I got a little something going on, and both of the new Continental shows, number 6, and the USA TV show, number 17, both of those broke first day viewer records for the first time. And number 6 has just been tremendous. Wow, that program's going to be a big one for fans. It's a great one. It has me and Bob Armstrong in the Texas Death Match in the very opening of the show. So it's from back in the good old days when, gosh, I watch it and by God, I look pretty good back in those days. You know, as compared to the way I look now, it's like, wow, man. I didn't look too bad.
It's been a couple of years, Ron. Come on.
Yeah, well, it's been a few years. Yeah, I guess it's been a few years, and I guess it should change a little bit.
Yeah.
But so anyway, I'm real happy about those two shows, and every week now we're hitting them with the two shows, two new shows. Number 17 and number 6, Continental 6 and number 17 are up there now, and we're going to be coming with some more every week. You're going to get a new one of USA and a new one of Continental. And I've just started doing, man, these 2 stud stories a week now. And it seems like a lot of people out there kind of consider me a great storyteller, man.
Right.
And I'm not sure exactly why, but they like to hear the stories. So both stud stories this week were really well liked, and they set records. And the number 5 stud story about Andre the Giant and the Waffle House breakfast, man, has just been a gangbuster, man.
I told you, listen, from the time you told that story on one of the original Studcast, and I'm pretty sure it's also in one of the first ever Super Studcast was about Andre the Giant. But I told you that is a gem when you're talking about the largest man we've ever seen or known or been nearby, close up to. When he sits down at Waffle House, what is that like? And then the way you answer that and the way you come off with the story of you and Andre visiting Waffle House is again, it's a gem, dude.
Well, yeah, gosh, I was really, I was blessed to get to spend time with a guy like Andre.
Yeah.
And to see that, be able to witness that kind of intake into a human body is
the humanity.
It's pretty remarkable. That one was really popular, as I said. Now in Stud Stories number 6, man, it's about another one of those 11 champions, NWA world champions that I was able to wrestle in my career. Blessed again to wrestle some of the greatest. And this one's about Dory Funk Jr. And in my opinion, he's one of the greatest of all of them, man. His style of wrestling was just really, really unusual. And the next stud story, number 7, is going to come on Saturday, December 11th. And this one is going to be about 2 subjects in one. And it's going to be about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which was today when we're recording this show today.
Yeah, yes.
That's actually 80 years ago to the day.
Yep.
Next Saturday, I'm going to tell a story about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and it's going to come from a wrestler that trained me and my brother and my father and my uncles and my cousins and
wow,
and so many other wrestlers, Ron Wright, and so many wrestlers around the country and around the world. A guy named Charlie Carr, who happened to be in Pearl Harbor on a ship the day it was bombed.
That's incredible.
The story he told me, a pretty amazing story, Dave.
Yeah, and you said 80 years ago today. 80 years ago, literally within a couple of hours of time, because it was like 7:35 or 7:45 in the morning when it happened over in Hawaii. So that's an awesome one. That's going to be a good story, and we can't wait to hear what that's about. And this guy, you said this guy could actually see the Japanese fighter pilots in the plane, and he recognized, those are actually Japanese folks. So he could actually see that it was not a trial run or a test or anything.
Yeah, they were doing some trial runs. He said, he'd been in port there in Pearl Harbor for about 2 weeks, and he said they had run some trial runs where they had painted zeros on the planes to make them look like Japanese planes. Yeah, and the American pilots were flying those planes just to get people ready in case something like that were to ever happen. And oddly enough, he said he was there watching it when the first real Japanese plane came down. Him and his friend were standing on the deck of their ship. And he said they had the zero on the back of the tail. And he said, he looked at his buddy and he go, well, they're doing one of those runs again. And then he said he got to looking and he said he could see the pilot was close enough, he could see he was a Japanese.
That's incredible.
And he said to his friend, he goes, "Oh, wait a minute." And he said that first plane dropped the bomb that hit the Arizona, which was way at the far end of the harbor.
And it was
from where he was
so close that he could see the pilot's face, and he
could see that it was a Japanese pilot.
That is incredible.
That close to him.
Yeah, we can't wait to hear Charlie's story. And
man, Charlie Carr, what a great character too. His lifetime is a remarkable story in itself. So I'm loving these stud stories, man, and obviously I think fans are loving them as well. And if you're out there and you haven't gone to Southeastern Rewind, you're not subscribed yet, you hadn't listened to one of these, I think people are going to really enjoy these because they're not too long. Somewhere between 8-10 minutes and up to sometimes as much as 25, depending on the subject. Yeah. But I'm enjoying it. I mean, this is kind of a lot of fun for me, and like I say, I kind of think I'm getting a feel for what people want to hear and what they want to see. So,
wrestling today is not like wrestling of yesterday and what we now call old school wrestling. And I think that's why people are gravitating more and more. Plus, I mean, these stories are incredible. They're historical, some hysterical. So I really can't wait for next Saturday. And that one that you're going to be introducing one about Ron Wright. Tell us a little bit about this. It has to do with an airplane also.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Man, fans that know Ron Wright, believe it or not, he had an airplane. He owned an airplane, and he actually flew it himself. That to me was astounding. And I tell some Ron Wright stories in some of my Super Studcast. One of them is about Ron Wright. In fact, number 2 Super Studcast is all about Ron Wright, and I'm going to tell the story about one of the first flights I took with him, and he's going to fly me from Knoxville to Memphis, he and his brother. And then he decides that he wants to stop off at my father's ranch on the way over there and land on his little tiny runway.
Yeah.
Wow. And anybody that knows Ron Wright, can imagine what that was all about. But wow. Another great story, and I think fans are going to really like it, and that one should be coming up in the next week or so as well.
Yeah, all right. And for those listeners that really enjoyed Andre the Giant, especially on Super Studcast number 1 and all the other occasions, and they're soon going to hear Ron Wright stories that you may not be aware, you can get the 3-hour Super Studcast on Andre the Giant, the first ever, and Ron Wright, with lots more stories about both of those, and they're on Ron's website at tnstud.com. We talk about the stud store a lot. Listen, click on Super Studcast or Studcast, and that's where you'll find it. In this case, click on Super Studcast, only $2.99 for 3 hours of both hilarious and historic stories. And I guess we should cover the latest thing on your Southeastern Rewind channel too, Stud. Tell us about that.
Well, I'm very happy to announce for fans all over the world that they can now get the weekly Studcast, man, right on Southeastern Rewind. Fans have been getting it for years on tnstud.com on the website, and then they're all podcast outlets. It's out there and available on 30 or more different platforms. Yeah. But now it's also available right on Southeastern Rewind. And we want to make sure, man, Dave, that we make this available to everybody that wants it all around the world. And there are people all over the world listening to our broadcast. And just want to let them know that in case you're not aware of it, that you can go right to Southeastern Rewind on YouTube, and you can get every one of these now. We've been doing this, I guess, for the last 6 or 8 of them, I guess, something like that. Mm-hmm. They've been on the Southeastern Rewind site. And so fans, I encourage you, if you were looking for another location or you can't find it on yours or something happens, you can always find it on tnstud.com, and now you can always find it on Southeastern Rewind.
Yeah. All right. And speaking of making Studcast popular, which they are, let's find out where we're going to be riding in this one. So what's up today, Stud?
Well, we're going to begin with today's training. And this one, man, is the perfect subject for this Thanksgiving 1977 Coliseum event that's going to be the focus today. We're going to learn how and why did these holiday events affect so dramatically the business of wrestling companies and the fans that supported them. I mean, they were really, it was a huge concept to start doing this on Thanksgivings and Christmas, stuff like that. And so then we're going to jump into the fantastic card of Thanksgiving night, 1977 in the Knoxville Coliseum. First time ever in the Knoxville Coliseum, as a matter of fact, for a Thanksgiving event. And we're going to discuss the rating period, TV that promoted it. We're in the middle of that rating period in November of 1977. We'll talk about the results of the matches. We'll talk about the attendance on this big card. And, then we're going to be, you got it, I believe, Dave. Tell me what the learning tree question is for today.
Actually, Mr. Larry Bradshaw asked, why was there such a long absence of matches between the last one with the Mongolian Stomper against Joe Leduc?
Okay, and I think what he's saying here basically is there's about 4 months period of time that Joe Leduc did not wrestle the Mongolian Stomper a single time.
What was up
and
with that?
It was after the block busting incident, after he had spent time in the hospital.
Oh.
And so that's a great question. I look forward to answering that one, and why I was holding off on doing that again. So, great learning tree question. So let's ride in, man. Let's get to going, man. We're saddled up. You got Mr. Pickles. I guess he's still around, right?
Oh, he's in good shape. He's ready to roll.
All right. So let's jump into today's training. And listeners are going to learn how and why these holiday events so dramatically affected the businesses of wrestling companies and the fans that supported those wrestling companies. So let's start with how holiday events affected the fans, okay? And it was so obvious, man. And I always try to sneak down there on some of these big nights and kind of hide in the offices there in the Coliseum where I could see the people that were buying tickets in the lobby. And it was so exciting, man. And it was obvious, man, on these big holiday events, as soon as they started arriving at the building, because most families had been together most of the day. In the early afternoon, they had their dinner. They know they're coming to this event. And they had celebrated that big Thanksgiving dinner with each other, and they visited after the dinner. Some of them might even gone home, and then they met up later, or they just rested until just about dark. And by the time they arrived, man, and when they arrived, they were in much larger groups than normal. It's families. It's a family affair, basically. And the lobby and the ticket sale area was just mobbed with people. Wow, they just came by the thousands, literally, and the excitement of what was to come for them that night, you could just see it in their faces. They were just so happy to be there and so looking forward to these big holiday events. So the sheer size of these crowds on holidays was just truly, like I said, immense. I mean, the lobbies were just, and thousands of people will be stacked outside on the patio on the backside of the Coliseum, and the big steps in the front of the Coliseum. Yeah, it was just, it was a fantastic scene, man. And I'd been dreaming for years of this type of holiday event, and seeing the diversity of a big crowd like that. And, I've now been in the Coliseum long enough and often enough that the Chilhowie Park crowd that hated it when I first went to the Coliseum, they'd been coming, about 3 years at this point. And by golly, now the Coliseum was home for them. They felt real comfortable there. And I could tell that, the way they arrived and the way they acted. And the other fan base that I dreamed of getting there, those that would never go to Chilhowie Park, was coming in droves to the Coliseum. They were happy when we started coming to the Coliseum, and they were just, they were really supportive of it. So everybody at this point, Park fans or not, they felt at home now, and you could tell it when you saw those people in the lobby out there that this was a real exciting event for them. And we had programs for the first time ever on Thanksgiving, and the program cover was absolutely great. It had a turkey. It had a turkey's body, and the place of the turkey's head was, guess who? Ron Wright.
All right.
Ron Wright's head was on the turkey. And that was the cover of the program. What a beautiful program it was. And I think we sold that day, Dave, probably as many as 5,000 programs.
Wow.
Just wow. It was just a grand affair, man. Everybody felt at home, man, and it was clear and obvious, without a doubt, man, how excited everybody was, and it all happened with that first bell.
Wow.
And on these holiday nights, the entire crowd would rise to their feet, man, and roar, man, with its approval. It was a special thing, and you could tell it. Yeah, I like to have my timekeeper who rang the bell for the events and things on some of these events, and he knew that I really was into these Thanksgiving shows. And this first one, I sent for him. And I didn't come to the dressing room, and I told him, you come back and notify me before you ring the bell. And he came back and did that. And then I went that night, walked to the back of the building, to that big old huge black curtain that went all the way across the back of the Coliseum. Mm-hmm. And I stood back there sight unseen. And, man, I was just honored to be there for that bell. Honored to hear the explosion of glee, man, from those thousands of fans. I got the goosebumps, man, on my body, as I used to do sometimes when I was wrestling, and the fans really got into it. They got me into it. And I was always, it was wonderful to have my first look at that beautiful sold out arena, and it was packed with all those celebrating fans. I got to thinking, man, that night, how I had something to do with that moment. Boy, that was always so satisfying me as being an owner of a wrestling company, to think I got something to do with what's happening out there, with all those people being there, with all that happiness that's going on out there.
I mean, but look, to me, it seems kind of obvious from my vantage point, because watching the TV show together, it was a family affair. And then, of course, Thanksgiving is the biggest family day of the year. They've sat there and they've eaten together and enjoyed time and visited with friends and family they haven't seen in a while. And so now in the evening, they're headed out for an incredible performance. This just happens to be wrestling. So I think that says a lot. It's a great description of what the fans were feeling, Ron. So, I mean, they had to be feeling that too, a sense of satisfaction after a long day. So that's pretty awesome. But what about the business itself? How was it affected?
Well, anytime you filled your building, I mean, it seemed, the building to me seemed like it was begging for you to do it again and again. It's like that full building just almost talked to me, and it said, "Can you do it again? Can you get it bigger?" And setting records really is supposed to only happen once, but when you think about it, that once is the one until the next time comes and you break it. So that it was like these records were meant to be broken. So it was up to the wrestlers, though, at this point, just how much business was going to be improved by that night's matches, man. That was that important.
All right, and on the topic of wrestlers, how much did they have to do with everything?
Well, when you think about it, Dave, they're the reason everybody came.
Yeah.
It wasn't me, and it wasn't because it was Thanksgiving. It was because of what they did on TV and what they did in all these towns around there, and how important they grew to be to the communities, man, in all these cities. And so if you had a great crew on a night like this one, man, you didn't have to sit them down and get them motivated. It wasn't like a coach, sitting and going to his players before the game and said, by golly, we need to do this, we need to do that. It was unnecessary, man. And I could tell it when they started arriving, when the boys started coming in the dressing room. I could just tell by their attitude, by the way they were acting. You could see it in their faces. They were like those fans in the lobby out there. They were lit up like a Christmas tree. They were like, wow, man, this is going to be so much fun. And I knew that every one of them was going to go out there and they were going to give everything they had for those fans to make them go absolutely crazy. So, wrestlers may have been independent contractors, and they were. You were paid as an independent contractor if you was a wrestler, and, most of them didn't get the 1099 to, they worked for themselves. Mm-hmm. But on these big nights, these holiday nights, they were all like one team, man. They all wanted this to be huge, to be successful. And in fact, Dave, when I stood behind that curtain, man, and I looked out there and I got those goosebumps, I think on that night, when I think back, I wasn't the only one standing back there, man, that had those goosebumps.
No, absolutely not. And was this like a bonus night for the wrestlers? Was it a night that they would have been home? So did they make extra money by performing on this particular night?
Oh, wow, Dave. They made so much money. I mean, these crowds were so massive and they were so big that they would make sometimes 3 times as much as what they would make on a normal night. And it got to be big, really, really. We got to be huge. Starting in 85, we started having wrestling twice a day on Thanksgiving. We wrestled in the afternoons and sold out Knoxville's Coliseum.
Yeah.
And then we beat it down to Birmingham, 250 miles south, and wrestled at night for people in Birmingham to another sold-out crowd.
Yeah. Wow.
And so guys made as much on Thanksgiving sometimes as they would make in an entire week in one day.
Well, and that probably has a little bit to do how they showed up kind of happy. And they're glad to be there because this is a bonus night. Christmas is coming, and you're talking about 1977. I don't know how much you paid them. If you paid them $200, that's a pretty good night for a wrestler in the opening match or two. So anyway, that's an awesome way to open a Studcast, Stud. So what was the card for the first ever Coliseum Thanksgiving Spectacular in Southeastern history, 1977?
Well, this is crazy, but this one opened with a very different first match. It ended up being, and it was not scheduled until television, which was, the day. Had been days earlier, that this match was even added to the card. And it was a hair versus hair match between my brother, Robert Fuller, and a guy he had a rivalry with lately that was trained by Ron Wright, And we're going to get to the reason why that this match got shoved into this position, being the opening match on Thanksgiving night. Rob's going to wrestle twice that night. He's going to wrestle and put up his hair in the first match, and he's going to go back and wrestle again in the tag team championship match. Second match on the night was for the kids, man, basically. And the reason for that is because the kids came by the thousands, and with those kids came their parents and the other members of their family. And so we did things on these holiday events that we didn't do on normal cards. And this was one of them. The second match was a mixed tag team match. It had Roy Lee Welch, and Roy Lee had a midget lady partner named Princess Little Dove. And they wrestled against the pro, Doug Gilbert, and Diamond Lil was his partner. Mm-hmm. So next was... the next match on this card was a main event anywhere in the world. I don't care where it was. This would have been a main event. And Tony Charles wrestled his friend from Ireland, Pat Barrett, Thanksgiving night. And we'll talk about that match a little later and why I thought it was important. Then there was a World's Ladies Championship match, one of the first we'd had there ever And since I'd been there with Southeastern, the ladies' world champion was the fabulous Moolah, and she was defending her title against Joyce Grable. We talk about this lady in her matches. Wow. Fifth match was for the Southeastern Tag Championship. Don Carson and the Assassin, who were now managed by Ron Wright, were defending their belts against Ricky Gibson and my brother Robert. Special event was next, a no disqualification match. And in this match, the pin could take place anywhere in the building. Didn't have to happen in the ring. And it wasn't likely it was going to happen in the ring, to be honest with you. So Mr. Knoxville, Ronnie Garvin, took on his former partner, Bob Orton Jr. in this one. What a match. The main event featured two men who had been in one of the greatest angles ever done, but not in the ring together in almost 4 months before this card. And Joe Leduc was returning after a ban. He was banned from last week's TV show entirely, and he returns on this card to meet the man who almost broke his neck, man, 4 months earlier, the Mongolian Stomper, managed by Gorgeous George Jr.
All right, so that was absolutely an amazing card, Ron. I can only imagine what was on the TV 6 days earlier and how you set this card up through that TV show.
Well, let's see what actually was on that show, Dave. Okay, let's open it up. And as usual, in a close-up, he ran down the card for the day, and when the cameras backed away, there was Mr. Knoxville. A shot on behind him of Mr. Knoxville and Bob Orton Jr. in a still shot. They were fighting between and actually behind the ringside seats on the Coliseum floor. The ring wasn't even in sight. They were back in the building fighting. And Mr. Knoxville, Ronnie Garvin, sitting with Les. He's got his mask on, obviously. But that's the scene behind him. So Les, asked the mask wrestler, obviously, who's Ronnie Garvin, Mr. Knoxville, what he and Bob Orton Jr. were doing so far away from the ring. Like, what are y'all doing in that part of the building? And Garvin looks over at him and he has a one-word answer.
Here it comes.
He says, fighting.
What did you think it was?
Well, I'll be darned. Imagine that. So, and Les kind of got a little peeved by it, because, he expected to get much more than that out of him. So, he just tells the director to go roll the video, and so it happened in the video. They were just beginning this fight away from the ring. It wasn't like this is toward the end of it. They had just started to fight away from the ring. So, Mr. Knoxville, he didn't have much to say, because the video is pretty much telling the story. And the video, quickly exposed, man, the obvious hatred between these two former partners, man. And so did the bloody faces on them. I tell you that, too. They kind of told the story as well. So, Les asked which of the two, had asked for these crazy rules for this next match on Thanksgiving night, where they're going to be able to fight outside the ring and that the falls can count anywhere in the building. Yeah, so he asked Mr. Knoxville that question. And Mr. Knoxville comes back with another pretty good answer. And he goes, what difference does it make? He goes, we hate each other. and being able to fight all over the building, it's just going to leave us a greater chance that one of us is going to get hurt bad. So about this time in the video, Mr. Knoxville grabs Bob Orton Jr. He finishes that sentence, and then you see him grab Bob Orton Jr. And they're out there on the floor, and there's a concrete wall there, and he grabs him by the back of the head, and he runs him face first into the concrete wall. Oh, God. And then you can see the ringside seats behind them because they're following them with a camera. So they're on the Coliseum floor, and they're far away from the ring at this point. So Mr. Knoxville's watching the video, and he says, yeah, they can get hurt like that right there. He goes, and the studio reacted with the shudder, man. This is Bob Orton caught up, man. He was all bloody. The side of his face was all scratched and Oh, wow, it looked horrible. So Mr. Knoxville, he continued as if nothing had happened. He goes right on. He goes, Thanksgiving night, he says, maybe one of us is going to fall off the second balcony to the concrete floor on the ringside level. He says, or worse, he goes, one of us might fall down the concrete steps all the way from the upper balcony to the ringside floor level.
Wow. Okay.
So let's ask him a pretty obvious question. He goes, are you crazy? He goes, you two guys crazy? So he says, I've never seen such a match as this one, and scheduled for Thanksgiving night. He goes, in my life, I've never seen anything like this. And he goes, he says, I'm really surprised, that Southeastern officials even considered it, much less signed it, So Mr. Knoxville continues on with this conversation like he's not even listening to Les, and you see three referees. Finally, they're managing to kind of separate the two wrestlers, and the video ends. So, Knoxville just goes on with it. And he turns to Les and he says, he says, I'm not surprised you never being in a match like this, Thatcher. He says, you never had any guts anyway. Because you never wanted to break somebody's back, did you? Crush somebody's skull. Boy, in the studio went deadly silent with that one. Like, whoa, wow, this is getting strong, So he finished it. He goes, that's what's going to take to end this. He says to Les, he goes, not just a hospital trip, Les, but maybe one of us is going to be paralyzed for life. That's what I want, he says, for Bob Orton Jr., for him to never walk again. So the studio just gasped in horror, like, oh my God. So Les started to ask him another question, and Mr. Knoxville, and he just got up and he left the set. So one man was already in the ring for the next match, and the next guy that's going to be wrestling him is Bob Orton Jr. So Bob Orton Jr. passes Les. Knoxville's gone to the dressing room, and Orton Jr. passes Les. And when the camera gets a shot of him, he's got this large patch, man, over one side of his face, man, where he not only busted his eye, but he just got a lot of skin, torn off his face when he hit that concrete wall. Yeah. And, fans cheered him a little bit, but the matches between me and Knoxville, man, between him and Knoxville was so violent that they didn't seem like they fully supported either of them. They watched these matches and it was chilling, man. They were like, wow, these guys are hating each other. So Orton, man, he had no mercy on his opponent, like always. And it ended up as usual, his match, backbreaker, a submission, and he dropped the guy on his head. And this one, a little worse than the others, he had to be carried out. So first interview of the show was with these two. And Les had failed to mention the fact that the match was a no disqualification. But how in the hell do you have a match and where you can beat somebody anywhere in the building and not have it be a match no disqualification? They would be crazy not to have that stipulation. So that 2-minute interview between those guys left the studio crowd totally silent, man. I think it may have made some of them hesitant to even come the following Thursday night and buy a ticket, It was a very serious tone, man, that was set at the beginning of that TV show. The next match, it lightened the day a little bit. It was a very unusual, for television, World's Lady Championship match. Fabulous Moolah, versus Mae West.
Wow.
Mae West was a great one. She was an old-timer, man.
Yeah.
Tough. Both of these women are probably about the same age, and they're probably at this point late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah. I was going to say they had to be, when some of us started learning about these two, they were considerably older, so they had to be really in their prime. Wow.
Oh yeah. They were made to do it, man. They were bad women at this point, and since it was rating period, and and we had a world title match the week before with Nelson Royal. Gosh, this worked out great, man. So we had this is the second world title match in a row on television in the month of November, man. And who gets that on their television shows anywhere in the country? And it served its purpose, man, especially when Moolah began to do her thing, man. But gosh almighty, Lillian Ellison was her real name, and Lillian was a mean woman. I mean, and not just in the ring, but everywhere she went, I think, man. And, she would make wrestlers, grown men wrestlers, standing watching the match, they would cringe, man. She would grab a woman by her hair and she'd flying mare them over her back and then just start flying maring her with her hair, Wow. Just from sometimes for 30 seconds, she'd just be throwing her all over the ring, holding her by her hair. And it was like, gosh, I mean, you just, wow. Even men were like, oh my goodness, look at this. And then she'd kick them in the stomach so hard that you felt sorry for them. It's like, oh my God, did she kick her that hard? And then she made women really look good, man. That she made wrestling look real. And the audience cringed, man, just like they did when Mr. Knoxville ran Bob Orton Jr.'s face into the wall earlier in the show. There was absolutely nothing ladylike about the fabulous Moolah.
Wow.
So the second interview was different than usual as well. Tony Charles and his opponent for the Thanksgiving night, Pat Barrett, came to the set together, and they shared the set with Moolah. And she started off, the first thing she did is she challenged both of them. She said, I beat you guys. And after the way she had beat up Mae West, I mean, they probably said, hey, you might do it.
Yeah, probably no takers on that.
No, man. They didn't jump to say, hey, we'll show you or whatever. So, it was kind of a joke in a way. But when you looked at their reaction, you could see that they were thinking same thing I was, because I was watching this show on TV. I wasn't there. I'd been banned from Southeastern. I wasn't there. So I was watching on TV, and I looked at their faces, and I thought, boy, this is no joking matter to them, right? So she left the set, and, she had her little say about Joyce Grable and what trouble she was in come Thursday night. And boy, she was. And they took a couple of funny shots at each other. They kind of joked with each other about the upcoming match. But toward the end of the interview, they shook hands and they wished each other luck on Thanksgiving night. And then they both had to admit when they started talking about, wish you a lot of luck on Thanksgiving night. And they looked at each other and they said, and then they looked at Les and they said, well, what is Thanksgiving about? Because they have no Thanksgiving in their countries. Right. So they don't even know what this big night's all about. But, They said either way, they're gonna give fans a match. It was a great interview. God, after it was over, Moolah going over, and the fans gained a lot of respect for both Charles and Barrett, man. And boy, they were really going to gain respect for these guys come that Thursday night, because they are going to tear that Coliseum down.
That is incredible. Okay. All right. Hey, I think we're in a good spot. Let's get a break in. And before we do, while we're going to break, remember, you've got time to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube. You can subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will be dropped on YouTube. And make sure you tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind. All right, we'll continue with this Studcast in a moment right here. Stay with us. The Stud appreciates all the support fans given. The thousands and thousands of Studcast listeners, those that visit his stud store at tnstud.com and purchase souvenirs for family and friends. Those that have subscribed to his YouTube channel, Southeastern Rewind, where he is daily compiling the Southeastern, Continental, and USA TV shows that are his creation from his successful wrestling companies. Those enjoying his stud stories on Southeastern Rewind, and now his Studcast there as well. Without you, the fans, there would be no incentive for him to do what he does. If you wish, let others know about Southeastern Rewind on YouTube and encourage them to subscribe there and ring the bell. Tell others about his weekly Studcast at tnstud.com and all the podcast outlets. And the Stud would like to thank every one of you for your help and support. All right, welcome back into another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. It is David Summers. And Stud, let's get right to it. I think maybe we were going to be talking about the personality profile. So who is on the personality profile on this particular TV show?
Well, it's another classic one, man. Really, really good. Joe Leduc joins Les at the set. We're doing it live on this one. So they're in the Studio B, but they're only a short distance away from the studio crowd itself. It's kind of like they're all sitting right together in a way. Gorgeous George Jr. Has pre-recorded some of his thoughts about this upcoming match with the Mongolian Stomper, and they're working when they get to where we show that piece. They're going to show Stomper in the background, working that steel truck shock over, man, as usual in the background. Got him a good sweat going. So this profile, transported to fans months back, man. So Joe Leduc had his first opportunity to watch both the blockbusting videos from the summer of 1977, and then he got the chance, the opportunity to watch his blood oath, man, the chilling blood oath he did when he cut his arm with the axe. So these were basically probably the three most famous moments in Southeastern history at this point, and we were resurrecting the fantastic feud between two superstars on this profile. So the studio audience was deadly silent as they watched pieces of these three captivating videos, which these blockbusting videos were absolutely that, man. And Joe was just magnificent, man, during this. As always, man, he was humble constantly and thanking fans on occasion after occasion for their support, their continued support. He was describing what it was like to be in the hospital for so long after his injury, what it was like when Southeastern decided not to continue, to give him a chance to get even with Gorgeous George Jr. and the Stomper. How much he had been eager to get his hands on the Stomper again for months and months, but Southeastern wouldn't let him do it. And he talked about how hard it had been over the last 4 months waiting to get that shot at these two guys. So Gorgeous George Jr., in his piece that was pre-recorded, was just as determined as Leduc to continue the war between his monster and the man from Montreal, man. So he and his Stomper had been waiting for months, knowing that sooner or later Southeastern was going to allow the war to resume. And it began, obviously, Thanksgiving night, and that was just perfect night for it. So he and his Mongolian were thankful for the opportunity to, and I think Gigi said something about he and his Mongol were just real happy to have the chance now to put the idiot lumberjack back in the hospital again, So the fans reacted to the interview with, as you can imagine, a lot of boos throughout what Gigi had to say. So Leduc finished by thanking God for allowing him to return to the sport he loved, for having brought him to this beautiful part of the world, meaning the Smoky Mountains and that area in the Southeast, for having fans support for the first time in his career. And that's because he was a heel everywhere he'd ever been, but for the first time in his wrestling career, the fans love him. And he thanks Southeastern Wrestling for picking Thanksgiving night for this match, because it made it that much more meaningful. He said he knew fans were going to pack that Coliseum, and he was going to help them to continue their celebration by putting the Stomper in the same hospital he'd been in. So for the first time in the profile, the fans exploded for Joe at the end of it. They were kind of quiet, but at the end of it, they let him know how much they appreciated him. Mm-hmm. The stage basically was set for the return match. And matches that had never been seen before. The matches between these two were like nothing ever seen before in this part of the country, and probably any place else in the country as well. I mean, they were just crazy matches.
Hey, Ron, was this really his first time as a babyface? Had he done this anywhere else before?
Not that I'm aware of.
So
now, I don't know in Montreal if he was a babyface star.
Yeah.
But I do know that all the places he came in America, he was a heel.
So
he's actually going to go down to the other Southeastern in 1979 and 80 as a heel.
Yeah.
He won't go down there as a babyface. They'll never see him as a babyface.
But he probably was really enjoying this and feeding off the fans as being the good guy for a change. So yeah, man. He was absolutely loving it, and he didn't mind letting them know. And you could tell how much they loved him and how much he loved them. He spent a lot of time with the fans. He didn't go to these towns, smaller cities, with these gyms and hide in the dressing room. He would be out there and just surrounded by people. They were just they loved him, and he loved the fact they loved him. And even though there's a great distance and a big distance between Knoxville and Canada, wherever he was from, they were still the same people. These were his people. So that's awesome. That's really cool. That is a great personality profile, Ron. So I've got a feeling the Coliseum isn't going to be big enough. So who was next?
So next match was my brother Robert and Ricky Gibson. And boy, they were wildly welcomed by the studio. And it came immediately after the profile. There was no break after the profile. So right off of Joe Leduc sitting there and doing his thing and the fans cheering him, out come Rob and Ricky. And so Ron Wright, Don Carson, the Assassin, they joined Les at the set. They went to the set while these boys were in the ring. And Ron Wright had plenty of time, man, to brag about how he had masterminded the plot to not only return to Southeastern himself, but to have his championship team be responsible for running both Bob Armstrong and the Tennessee stud Ron Fuller out of Southeastern, and then did it in 3 weeks, 3 short weeks, ran 2 major guys out, so, and then he bragged about how they had changed everything in a short period of time and that he was going to soon be in charge and also be back with a special guest for the interview right after this match. It was in the ring. And they had a special surprise for Robert Fuller. So while all of that was going on at the set, their opponents for Thanksgiving night, the Southeastern Tag Title match, Robert Fuller and Ricky Gibson, they were making a statement of their own in the ring, man. Fans loved these 2 young baby faces. They finished both opponents off together. Rob won with the Fuller leg lock. Ricky Gibson drop kicked his guy from the top rope and covered him. And boy, that was a beautiful little shot in the instant replay. And then Ron Wright and his men, they left the set. And Robert and Ricky went there after the match. And remember last TV, Robert had Ricky help him, drop kick the Stomper in the back. He helped Rob to win the Southeastern TV Championship from the Stomper. So these boys are getting pretty close at this point. So they watched in a short video from the night before where Robert had a shot at the Mongolian Stomper Southeastern title, and Ricky was handcuffed last week, if you remember in that Studcast, to Gorgeous George Jr. in last week's matches. And at the end of that match, Carson and the Assassin, they get involved. And they jump on the handcuffed Ricky Gibson, who was handcuffed to Gorgeous George Jr. And that caused Rob to obviously have to leave the ring in order to help Ricky. You're not going to let Gorgeous George Jr., Don Carson, and the Assassin all beat up your buddy when he's there to help you out. And so Rob got counted out. While he's out there trying to help Ricky, he got counted out, and Stomper got an easy win, and Rob lost the match. But there were plenty of reasons for this tag match to be on the Thanksgiving night card. Les asked Robert if he knew what Ron Wright had in mind for him in the next interview. And Rob had no idea, so he's at the set. So Ron Wright, Carson and Assassin, and an old enemy of Rob's from the past, a kid named Larry Cheatham was in Studio B. So Wright started by introducing Larry Cheatham, and he introduced him, as was truthful, as a wrestler that he had personally trained, and that Robert Fuller had broken his leg, this young kid's leg, in his very first match, and that this man was now well. And he said, Ron Wright said, and I demand that Southeastern put Robert Fuller in the ring with him again, and they make it a hair versus hair match. Right. So, and he said, I want it to be the first match on the Thanksgiving card. What a great way to start the night off. He says, Ron Wright's talking, and he claimed that, well, there's Robert Fuller. He's lost all that beautiful curly hair, and he said, before the match even starts for the championship, he's going to be so down when he's up there and he's bald headed and his head shaved that he ain't going to be able to wrestle and help Ricky Gibson in beating my team. So Robert and Ricky, was less with the set, and they were shocked by this challenge. They weren't expecting this, and Robert asked Les if he knew anything about this, and Les said no, and he didn't think anybody at Southeastern did either. So he's like, this is a surprise to me. What do you want to do here, right? He's made a challenge. So Rob said, I think it's probably Ron Wright's plan to take my focus and Ricky's focus away from the tag championship match, and that he wasn't going to let him get away with it. He said, I'm going to be glad to start the Thanksgiving card off for the fans by seeing me whip one of Ron Wright's trainees and then get his head shaved right there in the middle of the ring. So studio popped, man. They loved the idea. So Rob told Les to tell the Southeastern officials to add that hair versus hair match for the opening of the card, and that he'd gladly accept that challenge. So then the last match on the last TV show during November, the rating period was all over. This is the last one in November, was going to be Joe Leduc. And he was so over after that earlier personality profile. It didn't make any difference who his opponent was the next Thursday. He finished this guy, whoever he was, with a bear hug, man. And gosh, Joe Leduc, wow. When he wrapped his arms around you and clenched those hands, that was a horrible place to be, was in Joe Leduc's bear hug. So Joe went to the set for the last interview. Gorgeous George Jr. and the Stomper went into Studio B, and it made no difference that their match wasn't even for the Southeastern title. No belt at stake. They're just wrestling each other for the first time in 4 months. And just to see these two go at it head to head again, after almost 4 months, was enough to get the fans really excited about the prospects of this match. So by the time their interviews was done, fans were wishing it was Wednesday night, the night before Thanksgiving. They were ready. And all that was left was to find out what was going to happen 5 days later, man.
So, there you go. That's another great TV. I can't wait to hear the numbers, because I know you've got Arbitron Nielsen ratings book. That's coming in within a couple of months, I assume. So what happened on Thanksgiving night, the first one ever in the Coliseum? What was it like?
Well, I'd already kind of explained what it's like to watch them all come in and to fill that building up and to hear that first bell ring and all that excitement. And then it just kind of went right straight on from there, because that hair versus hair match that got added to the card ended up right there in the first match. So Ron Wright brought out his man, Larry Cheatham, to the ring. And I really liked the guy's last name when you think about it. It's perfect for Ron Wright.
Yeah.
His name, Cheatham.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Ron Wright, if that was his real name, I doubt it. I got a feeling Ron Wright said, we going to call you Cheatham.
Yeah, yeah. So
because we going to cheat him.
Yeah, if it fits, it fits. Yeah, okay.
So he brought Larry Cheatham to the ring, And then he got the microphone and he made a real long speech about what Rob had done and how much his trainee had improved after Rob had broken his leg and his leg had healed and he's training him every day. He went on and on and on. And then he invited up the lady barber who was going to cut the hair and shave the head. You know, he invited her to get in the ring and he introduced her and he patted her on the back and all. You can imagine all the booing that's going on during all of this, man. So, and his man, you know, he got his man all fired up after the barber left the ring, man. And, you know, come on. And that boy's jumping up and down. And, boy, I mean, he's really ready to go. And then Ron Wright jumps out on the floor and they ring the bell. And Rob had his back turned in the corner. He was probably taking his jacket off. And, Wright's trainee, Cheatham, man, he charged old Rob. And Rob just stepped aside and shoved him into the turnbuckles. O'Connor rolled him, and he got the 3 count in 5 seconds.
Wow.
His man had been beat in 5 seconds.
Wow.
The Coliseum exploded. Wow, the roof came off. The first match, 5 seconds in, and they had the first explosion of the night. And so they set that boy down in the ring, and she cut off his hair, and then she shaved his head. And then Ron Wright had to stand there, and he screamed at everybody in the building for laughing at his man while this was going on. I mean, it was Ron Wright's probably a 15-minute segment by the time they shaved the dude's head. But, you know, it wasn't a great moment for Ron Wright. And it was even worse for his man named Cheatham.
I love the build-up because the build-up was really cool, and then it's over, boom, just like that. So I think the crowd was kind of getting a kick out of that also. That is a great way to open a big card. I would have loved to hear Ron Wright's tirade after that loss that quickly, of course.
Oh, yeah. Good stuff, man. So second match, Roy Lee Welch and Princess Little Dove, they gave this already excited crowd, man, a few more laughs as they defeated the Pro and Diamond Lil. In these mixed matches like this, there were lots of little spots in which the midgets did some things, and then they utilized their partner to do some things. Wow, they had great stuff. And, you know, all the kids were there and everybody. It was really a great part of wrestling. It's sadly missed in today's sport. You know, I mean, these moments are truly gone forever.
Yeah.
And, you know, the night basically after this second match was off to a tremendous start.
Yeah.
The next match, wow, it brought everyone back to the name on the marquee out front, man, wrestling. Not just wrestling, but beautiful wrestling. And all these throws from Europe and Tony Charles and Irish Pat Barrett, they gave fans one of the greatest wrestling matches ever seen in Southeastern. I got a chance to see it myself. I wouldn't have missed it for anything. And it ended in a 30-minute time limit draw. With everybody in the building on their feet, and they shook each other's hands at the end of it. Wow. I watched it from behind the big curtain at the back of the Coliseum. I got those chill bumps, man. It's like, gee, this is unbelievable stuff. And to me, that kind of match had to be on every huge card in order to keep business growing. That was the type of matches that made wrestling work. And if you didn't have them in your territory, you weren't going to be drawing what you should be drawing. So the next was the World's Ladies Championship match. Fabulous Moolah was just that, fabulous, man. She and Joyce Grable gave fans an all-new impression of ladies wrestling. Gave me a new impression, too. I'd seen some men matches that wasn't as brutal as theirs was. I was like, wow, Moolah made a huge impression on me that night, man. And in the future, I instead of having these double world championships with a NWA world champion and the world junior champion, I'm going to start bringing in her, and then we're going to have triple world championship cards in the future because Moolah is going to make her way onto a bunch of those.
Wow.
So Ron Wright got his heat back, man, after that opening match where his trainee Cheatham lost his hair in the tag match that was next. And he stole basically the victory for Carson and Assassin. He saved their belts. They were about to get beat. And he left poor Ricky Gibson laying, and he got in another chisel shot doing it. So he hadn't gotten away totally from his chisel, but it was being cut back. So Mr. Knoxville, Ronnie Garvin, under the hood, in this fight all over the building, crazy match, no disqualification, beat Bob Orton Jr. In an absolutely wild match of where falls count anywhere. It only had to have one fall, but you could do it anywhere in the building with this particular match. And they at one point ended up in the second balcony in the general admission seats. They fought their way 2 levels up into the Coliseum. And the fans and me, they'd never seen anything like that. I mean, I was like, wow. And at the end of the match, Bob Orton Jr. took a bump over the second balcony seats in the wall that dropped down under to the ringside level and landed on the concrete on his back, man. 10 feet, had to be a 10-foot drop. And Mr. Knoxville jumped off the same wall to the floor below and covered him to end the match. Wow, it was just and I'd had to get this match and to make it happen, I had to put together a special group of policemen that followed them basically all over the building to keep the fans back from getting too close, from a fan getting hurt, or from somebody knifing them or somebody doing something to them. And, because they were so close to the fans, they laid their punches in, man, much harder than normal, because they're right there. And you want those people to go away going, wow, gee, that's unreal,
Yeah, wow.
And, and it was one of those nights, man, where Ronnie Garvin got his nickname. That's why they started calling him Fist of Stone and the One Man Gang, because he was racking that Bob Orton Jr. with those punches that were just, you could hear him, you could feel the thud when he would hit him up in the top of the building. Mm-hmm. It was like, wow. I mean, made believers out of a lot of fans that night. God. The last match was what everybody came to see, obviously. A bloody match. It was out of control. It wasn't easily stopped even after the bell. And it was what these two guys, the Stomper and Joe Leduc did, and just as much as the Charles and Barrett match did for the wrestling fans, this match did for those that wanted to see that violence. There was a lot of them out there that wanted to see that kind of match, and there was no winner between either one of them. They stopped the match as usual, man. They tried to separate them. It was a big feat to separate them, and that was the case in many of their matches. The winners, you know who the winner was that night, man, in that match? The fans.
What an incredible night. So how many did you pack in that evening?
Well, it was another sellout. It was another turnaway crowd. It was 6,000 plus. It was, 61, 70, some, strange little number. I don't remember, but I know it was over 6,000, as there was the all-time record, and I know that according to the building manager, probably at least 3,000 people couldn't get in, got turned away.
Holy cow.
So the Coliseum was just too small, man, at this point.
Holy cow. I mean, how can you not have something to sell those 3,000 people that are walking away? God.
Should have had a pay-per-view, man.
Yeah.
And if I had been longer in the business, this was a little bit before pay-per-views started happening.
Well, I was going to say, did they even have closed captioning? Closed circuit situations like that back then in 1977. So,
Yeah, they didn't have it, but you know what? This Coliseum was perfectly situated for it. The Coliseum, the big part was on the right-hand side of this building.
Yeah.
And on the other end of this long structure was a auditorium that held about 3,000 people.
Yeah. Wow.
That you could have put the screen up on the stage, and you might have been able to put the 9,000 in that building that night.
Man, that's incredible.
I wish I had done it, but no. Well, they were there. They were at least there.
Man, they just keep getting better, Ron. So, all right. So now we have a great question for our learning tree today. Larry Bradshaw says, why was there such a long absence of matches between the Mongolian Stomper and Joe Leduc? We talked about that earlier. What was that? What was the deal on that?
Okay. Yeah, well, there was a reason for that, and it was my idea. And then it was my plan from the very beginning when I had both of these guys in the territory. And when we decided we couldn't have the Stomper be a heel and Joe Leduc be a heel, and, it wasn't going to make sense. Both bald-headed, both mean-looking, both nasty dudes, that we needed to make a babyface out of Joe Leduc. And so my plan from the very beginning, I spent a lot of time and an effort to get away from the blood and gut style of wrestling that was in Knoxville when I came there in 1974. I did not want to have consistently that type of matches. So my thoughts were, how can I get away from it? So I wanted Southeastern wrestling basically to be a predominantly wrestling territory. If it became a territory, I wanted it to be based on mostly wrestling. Mm-hmm. And I know many fans before my arrival were brought up before I got there into Knoxville in East Tennessee. Fans were brought up on blood and guts matches, man. Ron Wright and Whitey Caldwell, chain type matches in which, God, the blood just was everywhere.
Wow.
And in my opinion, there was a time and place for those, but you didn't want to have them too often, man. So there was just as many, if not potential fans, that didn't want or need a steady diet of that type of match. Those that didn't want it also didn't come to Chilhowee Park. And some of them, I think, back in those days, was for that very reason, because they didn't want to see all that blood. And I wanted to make the sport work for all fans, not just for those that wanted to see the blood, for those that wanted to see the wrestling. Providing a little of everything, I thought, but not too much of anything was the great formula for professional wrestling. Give them something of everything, but don't give them too much of any of it. So I brought in great wrestlers in the beginning when I got there, like the Dale Lewis and the Danny Hodge, the Nelson Royal, the Tony Charles, the Pat Barretts. I just kept bringing them, and many others for those fans that appreciated real wrestling. And because I appreciated it, it's what I wanted it to be. So it began to happen in the first couple of years, especially when we started moving into the Coliseum, that fans began to change their attitude from that blood and guts era. And then along came Stomper and Leduc. And they were only made for one kind of match. You couldn't put those guys together and expect them to go out there and give you a great wrestling match. Wasn't going to happen. So in 1977, once they're both there, I got Stomper as a heel. He's over. I got Joe Leduc. I'm going to make a baby face out of him. I finally threw them together in 1977. And week after week, man, for a short time there, wow, buildings weren't big enough, and then along came the blockbusting angle, man. Wow, it accentuated. But I needed to get away from all that violence and that blood for a little while. And I'm sad to say, Joe Leduc's injury kind of provided me an easy way to get away from it. He needed time to get totally well after his hospital stay. And Southeastern needed to get back to more wrestling during that time that he's off. And so it wasn't by design or a plan to happen that way. And I can't remember the gentleman that asked the question, Mr. Bradshaw, I think it was. It wasn't by design or plan for it to happen the way it did, but it did happen. And for almost 4 months, they never wrestled anywhere in Southeastern against each other. And then suddenly, within 3 weeks, Bob Armstrong and myself got eliminated from Southeastern. Something big needed to happen. Joe Leduc was finally well. The Stomper was still here and champion. And on Thanksgiving night in 1977, it seemed like the perfect time to bring back the violence. And boy, did they do it.
Wow. And that's how you do it right there on the Studcast. All right, folks, on Facebook, become friends with the Tennessee Stud on his Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud, or author Ron Fuller Welch page. Simply like and follow him there, and you automatically become friends with a legend. Follow him on Twitter at Ron Fuller Welch. Also, get on board the hottest YouTube old school wrestling channel. It's called Southeastern Rewind. If you haven't checked it out, tell your friends, save them some time of messing around on YouTube when you're really looking for the old school. Subscribe today and enjoy great USA, Continental, and Southeastern TV shows from the 1980s in the order they were produced, plus current Studcast, historic stud stories, and a whole lot more. Go get your Christmas gifts from the Stud Store this year at tnstud.com. tnstud.com. Click on Stud Store. Great gifts that have real meaning for real wrestling fans. Autograph photos, T-shirts, Tennessee Stud mask exactly like the ones that he wore back in the day. A great Continental DVD 5-pack of DVDs. 62 matches, 12 hours of classic video action, Ron's brilliant Brutus novel, autographed, and much more. It's all at tnstud.com. Click on Stud Store, and tnstud.com is open 24/7. Get your orders in so they can get it back to you in time for Christmas. All right, so where are we riding next week, Stud?
Well, we're going to have another lesson, man, for wrestling fans in next week's Today's Training, like we always do. We're hopefully going to teach them something else. And we're entering, obviously, December of 1977 with another great card. One match in particular has Tony Charles and Pat Barrett, both of them great scientific wrestlers, in a very interesting Texas death match. So Mr. Knoxville and Bob Orton Jr. are still at it. The Joe Leduc and the Stomper are still fighting it out. Thunderbolt Patterson going to return to team with my brother. And there's a lot of other great stars on that card next week. Next week's Learning Tree question must have come from somebody who watched Continental TV show number 5 on Southeastern Rewind because he asked, what did you know about Adrian Street before you booked him in Southeastern Pensacola? This was his United States debut. Curious to find out who recommended him to you. And that number 5 show was the United States and American debut of Adrian Street. And, great question. Look forward to that one.
All right, cool. All right, so no wonder the Studcast just keep getting better. We have some great fans with great questions, lots of history to work with. All right, and listen, Ron, it's an honor to be a part of this, so thank you very much. It is just cool to hear it all go down.
Well, man, you and your horse, Mr. Pickles, are a big part of it, of the success, man. And most of it is attributable, obviously, to our great fans, and many of which support us and have been since the very beginning. And thanks to all of you out there listening and all of those people that have supported us from the beginning. And please take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.